Hi, it's Lea McComas and welcome back to my studio for lesson 3 in portrait quilts. Hopefully you are starting your week with something that looks like this. You have your grayscale, posterized, enlarged portrait face printed out on a big piece of white paper. Right? So from here, I'm going to lay this down. This is a piece of freezer paper that I've torn. It's large enough to cover my image. I'm going to put waxy side down. So I'm going to be drawing on the paper, and I'm going to take some little pieces of tape, just painter's tape, and I'm going to fasten this down over my photocopy piece. Now, if you don't have a light table, and for a long time I didn't, I would just take this over and tape it to a window in my house. And I would use the sunlight coming through to light the back of my paper so I could see the lines that I wanted to draw. But for today, because we're videoing this, we're going to work on a light table here in my studio, and I'm going to take just a second, reposition myself, and put you over my shoulder so you can watch and see what I'm doing. All right. Okay, here you are. Make yourself comfortable looking over my shoulder. We're going to now zoom in on my light table so that you can see what I'm doing. The full portrait piece doesn't fit on the light table, so I'll move it around, but as long as I've got my papers taped together, they're not going to slide around. When I do this, I like to use a mechanical pencil because I don't have to run off and sharpen it over and over again, and it keeps a really fine point. But for the purposes of this video, so you can actually see what I'm doing, I'm going to set the pencil aside. Oh, it's also great for erasing mistakes. But I'm going to put the pencil aside and get a fine point Sharpie just so you can see what I'm doing. But I really recommend do this in pencil. There's no reason to do it in permanent ink. I'm going to start with, this is Maya's face. I'm going to start with the lightest areas, and I'm going to draw those first, and I'm going to outline them. And because they're my lightest area, I'm going to mark them with number 1. So here I am. I'm just going to start one place. I also want to try, because this is going to be a pattern piece, it needs to be a closed line. In the end, they need to come together so I have a solid piece that I can cut out. So I'm going to start here at the top of her nose, and I'm just going to go around and follow. And there's little dots here. You don't have to, follow them all in and out. Kind of smooth it out. But let me go here. Around her eye, and I'm going to go up and around. And for the most part, I'm just getting the general shape. Here's a great thing. I'm going to get up into her forehead here, and there's a lot of dots. It's a real mix of the lightest color, value 1, and value 2. And I'm just going to kind of decide, you can't go, there's no right or wrong here. I'm going to decide. Sometimes I'm going to go in and grab those extra areas, and sometimes I'm not. And so I'm just creating shape on her forehead. And this will be a place where, very light and the next lightest fabric blend together. And it moves out. But it's important, you have to define the edge of your pattern. So I'm going to keep drawing. I'm going to come around. I'm going to scoot this up. Finish going. And I always like to start with value number 1 first. And then work from lightest to darkest. Let's get that there. And then I'm just going to put, here's a 1. Scatter them all around. Here's a 1, here's a 1, up here, here's a 1. Now Maya has a little spot on her cheek right here. I don't think that's all that important, so I'm not even going to mess with it. I'm going to ignore that and pretend it's not there. And now I'm going to go, I did notice too, there's a little spot up here, so I could choose to ignore that, but I'm going to draw a little bit of that and call it 1. That's value number 1. Now the next area out for that is going to be value number 2. And I can see it actually runs off the side over here. So I'm just going to start at the edge. And I'm going to go up, and this is her hair, so I'm going to be going in and out. But just remember, the more detailed your line becomes, the more detailed your cutting becomes. So if you don't want to do all that zigzaggy stuff, you might make your zigs and zags. So instead of coming way down here, I might just go like this. Okay, and I'm going to take this off the edge. And then up here, there's some darker places. I'm going to go in and draw this. It's a little lighter, and I do want that detail, but you could choose to ignore it. I'm going to call that number 1. And look, up here it gets even a little darker. I'm going to go draw this piece, and I'm going to call that number 3, because I'm drawing number 2. So along the way. Up here there's some more pieces. I'm going to pick up here. Here's some dark hair that's coming in. So I'm going to separate that from number 2. And here, I don't know if you can tell, the edge is really irregular coming down. I don't like that, so I'm just going to smooth that out. And again, this is number 2, this is going to be number 3, and keep going around. And once I've drawn my value 2, I do tend to be a little more careful about drawing shapes around the mouth and the eyes. Hair isn't important because your hair moves around all the time, but the shapes of your eyes and your mouth really define the face. And so if you muck up somebody's eye or mouth, in the end it doesn't look like them so much. So those are important. Here's the thing too, I want to go from lightest to darkest values, and I really try not to skip values. But you can see here there's a lot of contrast change really quickly. Here's 1 and here's 4. But you want to, so I'm going to draw this and I'm going to leave a little area and that connects. And this is 2. And this is 2, and this is 2, and this is still 2. This is a big space. And it's a very windy pattern piece. Okay, I'm going to come down under her nose and go up. And I'm going to stop and I'm going to label these again. And sometimes I squeeze a little 2 right in there and here and here. And here's another couple of areas. This isn't connected, but it's real important around her mouth. Now I know that I'm going to go really dark, so I'm going to raise this line just a little bit to give me room, so that my pieces aren't really, really tiny, tiny thin. They are going to be kind of thin. This is still a 2. Okay, I better come down here and finish this line. Take it around. There's her chin. Coming back around her neck. Whoops. Now here, I went offline. I'd erase that if I had a pencil. And here's some zigzags on her neck. Now I told you you have to have closed lines, and you can see that I've run off the side of my paper a few times. That's why I'm going to take a pencil and I'm going to also draw, and a ruler, draw the edge of my quilt. It's important that we define where that edge is. So now I have a closed line. I've just run into the side. I can cut that out and make a completely separate piece of it. Here, I don't know if you can see, but it gets very dark right here. Sitting next to it, I can see that this is an area, that's her eyebrow, and it goes down into her eye socket, and then there's an even darker patch right here. Well, this is going to be 3, this is going to be 4, and this is going to be 5. Sometimes it's hard to see those on the camera. If you're having trouble making them out, you might put it on a window where the sun is shining through. It'll make it a little brighter. Something else I do sometimes is turn the pattern piece over without the paper shining through, and I draw those lines so that they show up better when I'm drawing on the front of it. It's important that you close the areas and that you define everything with a number. You want to be sure and do that, because we're going to cut all these pieces apart, and once they're cut apart, you might have a funny little shape like this, and you have no idea which fabric to use, if it's a light or it's dark. So it's very important to be sure as you're going along that you label all of these things. And you can't over label, just keep going. This is 2, this is 2. Oops, here's a 1 I missed on her chin. So we'll do that in a 2. Okay. Finish drawing all those lines. I'm not going to do it for you here. I'm going to let you do that on your own, but I do have a pattern piece that's finished, so I want to shift you to there. There's some more marking that you need to do. So we're going to turn off the light table, and I'm going to turn on the studio lights again, and we're going to reposition you so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, the light table is done, and the drawing on freezer paper is here. This is a finished drawing. There's just a few more things we need to do to prepare our fabric this week. One thing is, I'm going to take a highlighter and I'm just going to go around the edge and mark it orange. When we put this together, it's something like putting together a jigsaw puzzle. And I always like to find the edge pieces and know where they are. It helps me kind of figure out what's going on in the puzzle. And I think it's helpful when you're putting these fabric pieces together to know when you're looking at an edge and when you're looking at a piece or an edge, a line that needs to go against something else. So I draw it all the way around. I would do the top as well. The second thing is, we don't want our fabrics just bumping into each other because it's likely you're going to get some gaps. It's never going to be perfect. So I always want one fabric to tuck under the other. And to do that, generally you want your lighter fabric tucking under your dark one so that you don't see the seam or it's not a seam allowance, but it's that same concept. You don't want that darker fabric showing through the lighter one. So you're always tucking lighter under darker. There are a couple exceptions to that, and I'll talk to you about those in a minute. So in order to do that, I'm going to go along my lines and I'm going to start with my number ones. I want number one to tuck under number two. So I'm going to put little arrows all along this line where one butts up next to two. I'm going to put one here, and here, and here, and here. And then when I get to the end of this line, I see it's orange, and I know this is the edge, so I don't have to worry about it. Okay, up here in the top, I want all my ones tucking under my twos so they don't show. And you might hear some barking in the background. That's my little miniature dachshund Coco trying to tell me that it's time to stop working and come out in the backyard and play catch with the tennis ball. But I'm going to ignore her. I hope you can too. So I usually like to start at one place and follow the line all the way around. So we're going to take a second and do this all the way around. When I cut this piece out, this number one piece out, I'm going to know that I'm not going to cut right next to the edge of the fabric, but I'm going to leave about a 1/4 inch. And that way I can tuck it under the number two fabrics and I don't have any gaps. And it also, when I fuse it all together, will make things a little more stable. And now I'm back to where I started. So I know that entire line has been marked. There are a couple of times when you're not going to do what I just said. And here's an example right here. This is a number 5 piece and it's very, very dark. And there's a tiny little number 4 piece. So if we're following the rule, we would say, oh, 4 has to tuck under 5. But that would mean cutting a hole right here and then getting this bigger piece of 4 and tucking it in behind. In this case, it's not going to matter. I'm going to cut out number 5 and then I'm just going to cut a piece this shape and stick it on there. This is also Maya's hair, so the shape of it doesn't really matter. Okay. Also up here, here's number 2 on Maya's lips, and here's a 3. I don't want to cut a hole and tuck that tiny little number 2 piece in behind. It's a little bit of work. An exception you can make is 2, 3 is going to tuck under 2, and as long as it completely covers underneath this number 2 pattern piece, you're not going to get this shadow line that shows up. So you can do that with small pieces, and it's a lot easier because I can just cut this number 3 is going to tuck in 4. Well, that follows the rule, so that's okay. You need to go through your pattern and make these red marks on every line. Every line should be extended on one side or the other. So here, my 2, it's going to go under 3. This is 3 and this is 4, so I'm going to draw red marks along here. My 2 is going to go under my 3. Be careful. I had a student once who was just so conscientious about making those red marks, and she made red marks on the sides of both lines. And so you can see how that wouldn't work. You don't want to extend this fabric and this fabric because instead of one tucking in the other, they're both going to be crunching into each other. So be sure that you put the red marks on one side only. And this tells you what fabric needs to be extended. All right, this is a lot of work. Take your time at it. Don't try and do this all in one sitting. Maybe draw your pattern. Be sure you have your numbers. Take a break, come back, have a cup of tea, or come back the next day and just double check, make sure everything has a number on it. Okay, then start making your red marks. And again, if you have to, take a break. It's a bit tedious, this part of it. Come back, just make sure you've done it right. And then take a very deep breath. You might want to have some tea, have some herb tea, because you're going to need to calm yourself for this next part. You're going to cut all of this apart. You're going to cut these pieces apart. This is your homework for next week. And I will warn you, this is a very scary process. So just be brave and trust the process and come back. And I tell you, it gets easier after this. You'll have amazing results, but it does get very scary. You're going to end up with pieces like this. I've already done this again. Here's like piece number 1. Okay, and you can see it's the corner piece right here. So I know these are outside edges. I know that when I cut out the pattern, the fabric, I'm going to extend along here, and it'll fit together with some other pieces. Here's a piece that you might want to take a look at. This is a pattern piece. Let me move it here over the dark table so you can see it. Pattern piece number 3. But let me hold it this way. And right here is a smaller piece, number 2. I didn't bother to cut that out because I can just eyeball that. I can probably take a piece of scrap fabric when I'm done cutting out my number 2 pieces, and it's going to be about that thin, and I can cut it to be about that long, and I'm just going to stick that on later. So I'm not even going to worry about cutting that one out. So you can do that. When you're done though, I will warn you, you're going to have what looks like this. Pattern pieces. Lots of pattern pieces, and some of them are going to be kind of stringy, and then down in the bottom you're going to have a lot of little pattern pieces, but it's all going to be okay. Right? So, best of luck on this. Come back and see me next week. Also, post your pile of pattern pieces when you get it done, and let's see who's got the biggest, messiest, scariest pile. And then that will also enter your name in the drawing. At the end of our 8 portrait quilt lessons, we're going to draw a name, and I'm going to make a portrait quilt for that person. So you can get your name in on that drawing just by sharing your scary pile of pattern pieces. All right, see you next week. Bye-bye.